From the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center, HEC-TV, St. Louis Public Radio, and the Danforth Center present Conversations, a discussion about the roots of social life in bees.
Good evening and welcome. I feel like I should have a gavel so I can call the meeting to order. But at any rate, good evening. My name is Hal Burrows. I'm the chairman of the Conversations Committee, which is part of the Friends Committee and we're a group of volunteers involved with the Danforth Center. I succeeded Molly Klein in this role, and unlike Molly, I'm not burdened by any scientific knowledge whatsoever, which puts me in a perfect position to introduce this evening's program. First of all, a word of thanks to our Friends Committee and to the Conversations Committee for their continued support and commitment to this program. The meetings are always lively. There's always interesting ideas that are bandied about. As we get started, let us recall the mission of the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center, which is to improve the human condition through plant science, feed the hungry and improve human health, preserve and renew our environment, and enhance the St. Louis region as a world center for plant science. Ambitious, lofty goals, but something that's been embodied by the history of the Danforth Center. A further word of thanks to this evening's sponsors, St. Louis Public Radio and Higher Education Television. Let's see, and all right, and this is my favorite part of the introduction. During tonight's program, we will incorporate Twitter as a means to collect questions for our distinguished panel from the audience. I know that means as much to me as it does to you, I know. As well as from others who will follow the conversation remotely. For those of you who tweet, please tweet us your question at Danforth Center and view selected tweets on your tweet wall. Yeah, don't ask, don't tell. The hashtag for the event is hashtag CONVOSTL. For those of you who do not tweet, no worry, we will still collect questions the old-fashioned way on cards and transfer your questions to Twitter. Instructions for how this will be accomplished are included on your question card. The use of Twitter is a way to share the discussion and expand awareness of the exciting things happening at the Danforth Center and in our region. I am very honored this evening to introduce the topic and our speaker, how science is revealing the basis of social life and cooperation in bees, and how we can benefit from understanding bee behavior, featuring Dr. Gene Robinson from the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And just so you know, in preparation for this evening's presentation, I actually did go to see the movie Mr. Holmes, and those of you who've seen it know that tells you some very important distinctions between bees and wasps. Beyond that, I'll leave it to our speaker and to Dr. Carrington.
Well, welcome to this edition of Conversations. My name's Jim Carrington. My job is usually to sit right there. Occasionally, I sit right there. This is the first time I've sat in this seat as the moderator, and it's a real honor because of who our guest is this evening. Gene Robinson. Gene is a PhD, got his bachelor and PhD from Cornell University. He has been at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign, on the faculty since 1989. He's the director of the Woese Institute for Genomic Biology, a terrific research institute at the university. He's the director of the Bee Research Facility. He was the heart and soul, the motivator, the organizer of the Honeybee Genome Sequencing Consortium. He's the author or co-author of nearly 300 scientific publications, most notably about bee biology, bee behavior, the bee genome, and in my view, and in the view of everyone else that is thinking, the leader, the authority in the world on bees and bee behavior. It's an honor to have you here at the Conversations. Let's start not in your academic career, but let's go all the way back. How did you get into bees?
Well, first of all, let me say it's just really a pleasure and an honor to be here. The Danforth Center is one of the most prominent and illustrious research centers in plant biology. And I'm just really thrilled to have the opportunity to be here. In the audience are some former students and postdocs, as well as some friends, and so it's great to be here. I'm delaying a little bit the question, so I have to go back in time. So I was working on a kibbutz in Israel when I was 18 years old, and picking grapefruits, and nothing against grapefruits, but bored to tears. And one day they asked if I would help out with the bees. And I thought, well, something else to do, and I tried it, and I was just smitten from that very first day. And then I had to slowly but surely figure out what was it that really captivated me, and what would I be able to do with that. And I must admit, for the moms in the audience, that my mother helped guide me. So after she got over her disappointment that her son wasn't going to be a doctor or a lawyer, she said, well, if you really found something that you love, that's great, but get a PhD in it. And so that's what I did, and that's how I got started in bees. And I guess one final point is that in biology, many people fall in love with a question and then find the right system to use to address that question. And then a small minority, including myself, fall in love with an organism, and then you have to figure out what the organism is good for. Why is it captivating in a scientific sense?
And so you were smitten at 18 by bees, smitten, not bitten, but probably stung. Maybe we can just get out on the table. Why bees? Why is it so important to understand bees and bee behavior?
Mm-hmm. Well, there are a couple of reasons, and bees are really unique in the ways that they are important as models to study social behavior. They are paradigms that we need to understand in social behavior. They also, when you think about that, you think about something that you saw in the video and understanding the basics of behavior. Bees also are very important from the perspective of biodiversity. There are 20,000 species of bees on the planet. They all play very unique roles, and it's important to understand their roles in biodiversity. So we have biodiversity and we have social behavior, and then both of those very general, very basic, very fundamental aspects have applied directions to them. So when you think about biodiversity, it's a very easy segue into agriculture, so their role in our agricultural systems. And when you think about social behavior, it's a very easy segue to think about how we use that information for new medicines to better understand human health, and in particular, mental health.
Mm-hmm. And so maybe we can just walk through some of these big whys of bees. Let's start with biodiversity. You mentioned that there's 20,000 species of bees. Mm-hmm. Tell us a little more. What are the big issues in biodiversity? Are all of those bees important for pollination? Are they all social insects? Give us a sense of the diversity of bees and how they promote biodiversity in other ecosystems.
Mm-hmm. So there are about 20,000 species of bees, and almost without exception, there's one or two species, they all make their living exclusively on flowers. All collect nectar and pollen, and so, yes, they all are pollinating to one extent or another. They have very diverse levels of sociality, from solitary bees to those that have a little bit of sociality to those that have the most extreme and high levels, such as honeybees. Mm-hmm. And so as a result of that, they have different colony sizes and different impacts on the environment. Mm-hmm. So they have a lot of diversity, and that all is very important.
And of course, it's extremely important for plant biodiversity as well. 16% of all flowering plants are pollinated by bees.
Yeah. Yeah.
So without the bees, 16% of our plants couldn't reproduce.
Yeah, so that would be both agricultural and wild, is that right?
That's right. Wait,
Yeah.
are you asking?
Well, he's the plant expert, right? Yeah.
About 100 crop species
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
are bee pollinated.
Yeah.
And the species, and the list goes on and on. We'll get to that
Yeah.
in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But your area, your expertise, and where you really built up the world's leading program is in bees, their social behavior, and how they communicate. And we could spend 3.5 hours just on those topics alone. But why don't you start by giving us what are the big important issues relating to bee behavior and bee sociality? Let's start with how is a hive organized? It's just a swirling swarm of bees, right?
It seems that way, but when one peers a little deeper, there's a lot of coordination and a lot of order to them. So there's a very strict division of labor. The first division of labor is between the queen and the worker bees. There are 3 types of bees in a honeybee colony: queen, worker, and the males, the drones. Let's get the males out of the way first. As far as we know, they only exist to mate with the virgin queens. If you look up drone, which is the term for a male honeybee, in Webster's dictionary, sorry guys, it says lazy. Don't shoot the messenger, just telling you. So that's it for the drones. We probably won't be talking much about them for the rest of the evening. So the queen, her job is to lay eggs, and she does that very well. She lays 2,000 eggs a day. She is like an egg-laying machine. For 2 years, she can go at that clip. So she's awesome as an egg-laying machine. Is she a leader, as her name suggests? Sorry to burst your bubble, but no, she's not. She was named at a time in human history when we were particularly enamored of royalty. If she were named now, she would not get a name that lofty.
What would you call it today?
Well, I could tell you what my 22-year-old very irreverent son would call her.
Keep it
probably,
clean. Keep it clean.
probably something like, yo, egg-laying mama. And in that context, that irreverence, not all irreverence, if he's listening tonight, I'm not giving him a free pass. In that context, he's right. She does not tell the workers what to do. So that leads to the big question.
How do they know what to do?
How do they know what to do? How are they able to change their behavior, to respond to changing conditions, and act as if there is a centralized form of control? That's the consuming, the compelling question. There are other systems that operate and that make decisions and that change in response to changing external conditions that also don't have anyone in charge, like a brain.
What are some of the big categories of bee behavior? What do we want to know about?
So worker honeybees perform all of the jobs that keep the colony going, that develop the colony, allow it to grow big and strong.
And how big is a colony getting?
So at the peak season, which would be right around now for St. Louis, be about 40 to 50,000 adult bees. So the worker bees do all of the jobs. Some of the main jobs are taking care of the baby bees, cleaning the honeycomb, building the honeycomb, processing the food, turning nectar into honey, distributing the pollen and processing it, and then guarding the hive. Hives are very vulnerable because they're very attractive. They have so much food in them, so guarding them, and then, of course, foraging. The basic division is that an adult worker honeybee lives about 6 weeks, and she spends the first 2.5 to 3 weeks working in the hive, and then she graduates and becomes a forager.
And so the females are doing all of this while the males are sitting around.
He said it, not me. But he's right. He's right.
You know, sadly, there's a lot of species out there where the males really don't get the respect. The work all gets done by the females.
Yes.
How does a female form different from a male, different from a queen? What's the simple explanation for how 3 different types of bees develop from one genetic pool?
Mm-hmm. So first we start with distinguishing male from female. And the females are both the workers and the queens. So we'll get to that. First, males versus females. That is a very peculiar aspect of bee biology. And that is, if the egg is unfertilized, it will develop into a male. But if the egg is fertilized, it will develop into a female. So having gone there, then we have how do you get a queen versus a worker? That is a totally different mechanism, and that has to do with nurture and the nutrition that a young larva, a baby bee, gets during a couple of key days in her life. If she gets an excessive amount of food, she will develop into a queen. If she gets less, she will develop into a worker.
So there's some sort of stochastic thing that happens early, but then once the queen starts developing, then that just amplifies the resources that go to the queen?
Yes, exactly. That's right. And it may not be stochastic. We don't know. If a colony loses its queen, the workers will rear about 10 or 20 replacements to ensure that one will develop and do well. And how they select those larvae to become the next queen, we don't really know.
Now, there's all kinds of behaviors, again, and communication that happens between bees. But before we get to that, tell us, how do you study bees?
So first of all, we take advantage of the fact that bees have been studied for literally thousands of years. The association between bees and humans goes back a long, long time. There are cave drawings that are over 8,000 years old that show humans trying to get honey from bees. Honey provided humans with the very first sweetener. It also provided humans with the very first alcoholic beverage. And so as a combination of those, and you can take your pick of which one might be more important, people have been paying attention to bees for a long time. People have been watching bees for a long time. And so we know more about the natural history, what it is that the bees do in nature, than any other animal in the animal kingdom, with the exception of humans, just in terms of their natural behavior. So we start with that information. We work with beehives, the kind that beekeepers use for honey production. We have them out in the field to produce honey, and especially to produce bees. Then we often will use glass wall hives so that we can peer in and see what they're doing. And then, yes, we mark them either as a category of bees, sometimes as simple as a paint dot, but more and more we want to know about the individual bees. And so we used to use colored numbered plastic tags, and this has now given way to new technologies, RFID tags and barcodes, so that we can gather information, large volumes of information. And you can find out some really strange and interesting things once you get down to the level of individual bees.
Yeah, so when you're monitoring every bee in a population or in a hive, and what are the sorts of things that you can learn by tracking each bee continuously?
Well, I mentioned before that there's a division of labor and bees do different jobs at different ages, but there's also a great deal of variation in how intensely they do a particular job, how long they spend doing a job. Let me tell you a little story about a bee that we published a paper on, just one bee in the paper. Her name is Yellow 57. It is a paper that was pre-barcode, pre-RFID tag. We had the colored number tags. So I was doing a study as part of my dissertation at Cornell University on a hormone and what makes the hormone, the effect of the hormone on how quickly bees grow up and become foragers. I mention all this because it has nothing to do with what I'm about to say, and that's part of the story. There was one bee that I was observing going in and out, in and out. Her name was Yellow 57, and she was a real nuisance because I already knew the age at which she became a forager, which is all I needed to know. But she was just going in and out, in and out. And Hal, I'll commiserate with you. I used a tape recorder in this, so pre-Twitter also. The tape recorder, I was making observations, recording them. Yellow 57 in, Yellow 57 out. I would have to transcribe those at night. And why I have to waste so much time on Yellow 57? Talking about Yellow 57 with a graduate student in the lab at the time, fellow graduate student. And we were wondering, what could Yellow 57 be doing? Why? Because she was taking many more trips per hour than the other bees were, and the trips were exactly of the same length. They were all 3 minutes. Whereas other bees sometimes took 1 trip in an hour, sometimes 2 trips, sometimes a half an hour, sometimes 10 minutes. Yellow 57, 3 minutes. So we decided she could have been doing one of 2 things. Either foraging at a broken jar of honey somewhere, so it's very regular, very repeatable. She would go back to the same place, because bees are very smart. If they find a good place to go to get food, they will go there. Or maybe she's collecting water. Water also is a very repeatable, predictable place, and a few bees collect water. So Ben said, you know, I saw bees collecting water in a place, in a creek about a quarter mile away. And, you know, maybe she was collecting water there. I said, yeah, right, maybe she was collecting water there. He said, I'm going to go and look. I said, great, you go look there. Ben is 6'6", and he went to the place in the creek where he saw the bees. He looked down, and swear to God, he saw yellow 57 collecting water. Runs back to the beehive. I said, you won't believe what I saw. We immediately set up walkie-talkie monitoring. I was at the hive. I would see yellow 57 leave. He set up a chaise lounge in the creek and would look down at the rock where the bees were collecting. 1 minute later, yellow 57 arrived. It took her 1 minute to tank up with water. She would fly back for 1 minute and perform a round trip in 3 minutes. We monitored 1 day, 2 days of her activities, and we found that her flights during those 2 days of monitor activity was indistinguishable quantitatively from the first 7 days. So we conclude that she was collecting water the whole time. Bees don't usually do that. They usually collect water a few days, and then they'll switch to nectar. Who knew? So what's going on
So
with
you
yellow
find,
57?
you find these individual strange variants,
Yeah.
whether they're mutants or just behavioral extremes.
Yeah.
That's,
Yeah.
is that known? Do you know the basis for some of these anomalous bee behaviors?
Very little, very little. I mean,
This
it's
would be
a whole...
the point of one of the big goals of understanding the bee genome.
Yeah.
To associate genes and gene networks with behaviors.
Exactly, exactly. And that's the importance of the new technology to really improve our ability to collect these stories about individual bees. We can't rely on Ben Underwood and that, you know, amazing moment of seeing that bee.
Now, let's talk about the worker bees. Are all worker bees doing the same amount of work?
Well, that was the first result that we got from the from the RFID experiments, to find out that no, they're not. So the RFID technology was developed by a citizen scientist in my lab, Paul Tenzer, a retired computer entrepreneur who was a hobby beekeeper for many years. He asked to join the lab after he sold his company. And because of his technology background, I said, we really need this technology. Can you work on it? He worked for 3 years and developed beautiful technology. I paired him with a graduate student, and they made an amazing discovery with this technology, which is that 10% of the foragers are performing over 50% of the foraging activity. So it was a really stunning discovery that we didn't anticipate.
And what is it about that 10% that's different from the others? Why are they working harder?
We don't know the answer yet. So what we want to do is collect individuals like that to be able to measure their gene activity in their brain and find out what kind of differences there might be.
And so if you remove that 10%, you know which ones they are.
Yep.
If you remove the 10%, what happens?
Well, that was the second surprise that we got. If you remove those 10%, others will up their game and will work at that high level. So, and we've done this repeatedly, so the question is, why are they performing at a lower level? And one can look at it, and this is a delicious part about bee biology, one can look at it from two perspectives, either from the perspective of the individual or from the perspective of the whole colony. From the perspective of the individual, you could say, well, they're slacking off, they don't need to work that hard, they can get away with it. From the perspective of the colony, it could be that it's good to have a group of bees that are rested, that are like reserve bees, that are on the bench for you. And to take your sports metaphor and throw it back. And then if a calamity befalls the colony, foragers are killed by a storm or a pesticide or something, then you're then able to have a group of bees that are quote, rested, ready to take up the slack and perform that. We don't know which is true.
So you've got these hardworking bees doing 50% of the work. You've got all the rest of the bees. Are there some bees that are freeloading? Not counting the males. The males are freeloading, of course. Are there females that freeload? Do you find social cheaters in the hive?
Yeah, we don't know. There are some bees that are very, very inactive. So the first result to come out of our barcoding work is a result along those lines. So we put the barcodes on the bees. You saw some of the images. This is the work of Tim Gernot, a graduate student in the lab. Tim uses machine learning he takes an image every second around the clock of the bees. Then he's written computer programs to have the computer recognize each bee individually. Each of those barcodes represents an individual name of the bee, if you will. And then another program to identify when two bees are in a position like this, they're touching their antennae, they're sharing food. That's a social interaction. He labels that. He's basically building a Facebook for bees. And what Tim has found is that after 1 week, some bees will have over 300 of these interactions. Others will have less than 10. And so what does that mean? Does that mean that the ones that have fewer interactions are not as plugged into the society? Do they have deficient social skills? Is it a bee version of an autism spectrum that's plausible? And I'm saying this seriously. This is a serious condition, and so we think about these things in a context where we would love to see if they transfer to that context, to the other context.
Let's shift the conversation slightly. It's all connected, but how do bees communicate? What are the different ways that bees communicate with one another? And what are they telling each other?
So they have a variety of communication channels. The biggest one is olfaction, smell. They release chemicals or pheromones, and they have many different such pheromones that have different messages in the hive. So that's the main one. Then next would come sounds. There are a variety of sounds, buzzes, squeaks, and things like that. And then there will be physical touches. Those are three very important modes of communication.
And so what are they saying? They're conveying information. But what is the information they're conveying?
Well, let's take chemical communication, smells. So the baby bees will release a chemical that says to the adults, feed me, so to try to get as much food as they can. Adult bees will communicate with each other. There will be an alarm pheromone. Guard bees at the entrance will release a chemical that says there's an intruder in our vicinity. Bees that come back from a successful foraging trip, they want to get the attention of bees, other bees, because they want to give some detailed information about food, where to find it, how good the food is. They'll release a chemical that say, pay attention, I'm about to do a song and a dance that's going to give you information on direction, distance, quality information. So there'll be some of the signals like that. So that's the famous dance language.
It's mind-boggling. How detailed is the communication? They have a language of sorts. How detailed, or how many letters are in that alphabet, and how many words? How much? Help us understand. Is it like dolphins, or is it like we're talking here, or is it something much more rudimentary?
Yeah, so it depends on the nature of the signal that they're trying to communicate. For alarm, as far as we can know, it's just simply on-off.
So ringing the bell.
Yeah, that's right. For the dance language, it is much more nuanced than that. Bees give information on the distance the food is in a graded way, so there's a difference in the signal between 200 meters and 50 meters. They give directional information, how many degrees off of where the sun is in the sky. So they'll give that information. So a dance that's 90 degrees east of the sun looks totally different than 90 degrees west of the sun. And then quality also is graded. The better the quality of the food, the more likely they are to dance, and the more excited will be the dance.
So bees forage, they come back, they've got a great source, they're carrying a payload of nectar. They come back. how does the language get communicated? Are there multiple bees saying different things? Is there one bee that's the talker or the communicator? How does all the information get sorted out if there's 40,000 bees in a hive?
Yeah. That's a great question, gets to the heart of the matter. It's chaotic, but signals will emerge. So there may be as many as 1/3 of the colony will go out and forage. And some fraction of those bees will find a food source that's good enough to come home and write home about, to dance, to tell the other bees about it. So there can be multiple dances going on. There will be a group of 10 to 20 bees following each of those dancers. So a cacophony, if you will, a marketplace of ideas, if you will. And the best food sources will eventually win out because the bees that are most highly motivated will dance for the longest period of time and will attract eventually more followers so that eventually you will see bees going to maybe a single source or maybe just to a few sources. The males, as far as we know, are not participating. They hang around on the fringes and they're eating and they're getting ready for their big day, which is to go out and mate, but otherwise they're not participating in this.
Yeah. In a hive of 40,000 bees, how many males will be successful mating with the queen?
Just a very small number. So mating takes place outside. One queen will mate with about 20 males during a 1 or 2 day period, mating period. Then she stores the sperm in a special structure for the rest of her life. And so in human biology, it's a topic, how to improve sperm storage. Honeybees have figured it out. They store sperm at 93 degrees Fahrenheit inside the body of a queen, and the sperm remains viable for 2 years. So the queens mate for a couple of days, they store that sperm. And so there's one queen, 20 males. The ratio will be about 1,000 males to one queen. So if you do the math, you see that not very many males are going to succeed.
Yeah. Let's shift the topic a little bit and talk about applications of understanding bees and bee behavior to medicine and neuroscience. And I want to do this transition by showing up a slide of something that happened 5 or 6 years ago. You came to the attention of someone who's very important, Stephen Colbert. In fact, you have been the subject of 2 different Colbert reports. You are the subject of a wag of the finger, and you've also been a subject of a shout-out. What was that?
Yeah.
How did that come about?
I went from the doghouse to the Pantheon in Stephen Colbert. So we published some research that deals with how neurochemicals control dance behavior. And we found one particular neurochemical, the name is octopamine. It's very much related to dopamine, which in human brain is kind of like the pleasure juice. When a human encounters something rewarding, something sweet, something pleasurable, dopamine is released. In the insect brain, the analog of that is something called octopamine. So thinking about dance behavior and the context of dance, we wondered whether bees dance in the similar way to humans reacting to a rewarding stimulus like sugar or other things. And can we frame the whole concept of how to understand the regulation of dance behavior in a way that's inspired by our understanding of the human reward system? So we treated bees with octopamine, and we asked, does octopamine make bees dance more? And the answer is yes. We take a low-quality feeder that bees are so-so about, not likely to dance, and those that are treated with octopamine will dance at a higher frequency. Now, in order to interpret that better in the context of reward, we wanted to push the analogy. So we took a chemical that's related to octopamine. I think it's one that you may have heard of, maybe more than octopamine, and that is cocaine. That's what I thought. So we took cocaine because it's chemically related to the chemical that we used, but it's known to affect the reward system of humans. And we asked, is cocaine affecting bee dance the way that we would predict it would? If it does, we would be more on track for saying that, yes, we can understand dance behavior of bees in a reward-based context. So we published the paper. It does do the same thing that octopamine does. We published the paper. The New York Times thought it was interesting, picked up on it. Stephen Colbert's show picked up on the New York Times and gave it a wag, which for those of you that don't watch the show, or that didn't watch the show, it meant, this is weird, why are you doing this? Why are you wasting taxpayers' money? And so on and so forth. So undeterred, I wrote a thank you note to Stephen Colbert, sent a jar of honey, that jar of honey that's there, saying, thank you very much for covering our research, the reason why we did this research, and then I gave a short rendition of what I just said to you, and what we hope to learn from this, and thank you very much. I've gotten a lot of questions about the research because it was on the show, and I appreciate it. And got a thank you note from Stephen Colbert saying one of the nice things about not working for the government is we can accept any gift that we want. And saying thank you for having fun with it. It was meant in good spirit. And I thought that was done. I showed my kids the signature of Stephen Colbert, got some cool points for it, thought I was all finished with it. And then 3 weeks later, out of the blue, the producer calls saying, you're going to get a shout out about it. Now that you've explained more about the work, we want to feature it more. And so, you know, the point is you can't miss an opportunity to explain the work to the public. And even if it starts off in an offbeat way, you have to take that opportunity so that, I mean, you all know that here, that's why you're here, you're supporters of research. But we have a lot of educating to do in the public, and we just can't miss that opportunity.
Yeah, that's a fun story. Let's talk a little bit about bees and agriculture. We talked about there's 100 different species, almonds, citrus, squash, cherries, the list goes on. A third of all of our food that we consume as humans is the result of pollination. Tell us about that system. It's a system of hives moving all around the US, and in Europe they move around countries there. So how does that work? Just briefly. Almonds are only flowering in early spring. So kind of take it from there. What happens in a typical year?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so our agricultural systems have developed so that we have very specialized and localized crops that are in bloom for a short period of time. Those that depend on honeybees, there's a very short window. For almonds, for example, there may only be, it's in the spring, early spring in Northern California. February 15th is the typical start of the bloom. Those of you that know the weather in Northern California know that it can be very iffy, very dicey in terms of rain, cool temperatures. Bees only fly when it's above 57 degrees. And so most of the time when the almonds are in bloom, it might be cool and rainy, no pollination going on. So what growers do is they essentially create an insurance policy. They import, they bring, they rent large numbers of colonies to saturate the almond orchards.
So about 1 million hives come in just for the almond pollination season each year.
Yep, that's right. That's right.
Almost half of the hives in the US.
Yes, yes.
And then after the almonds pollinate, the hives get packed on a truck and they go to the Willamette Valley and do blueberries.
Yep, yep.
Or they go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And so this seems like it would cause a lot of stress.
Yeah, I mean, it is stressful. It is stressful to be moved around that way. It's been going on actually for a long time, much longer than the current problems that we've had over the last decade.
And so before we go to the tweet wall, tell us a little bit about what I think most or perhaps everyone here has heard about, maybe some know a lot about, called colony collapse disorder. And stress is the lead into that. What is colony collapse disorder? Is it a big problem? Is it affecting our hives declining? Tell us about it and what causes it.
Colony collapse disorder is indeed a serious problem. It has gone on now for about 10 years, and there's a great concern about the decreased numbers of colonies in America. And what we've learned about it is that there is no single factor that causes colony collapse.
What would be the
disorder.
hallmark of colony collapse disorder? If we've got hives out here on the Danforth property. Bob Sears and the Eastern Missouri Beekeepers Association does a great job managing them and using them for education. If one of them goes down by CCD, colony collapse disorder, what would that look like?
So the hallmarks, the classic hallmarks, are an extremely rapid decline of the population, such that when you go to the hive after, say, some interval of time, short interval of time, maybe a week or so, you will find hardly any bees, a handful of bees instead of tens of thousands.
And where do the bees go?
Well, in those cases, it appears as though they are deficient in their foraging ability and they're just not able to make it back. They get lost or perhaps predated upon, and they just aren't able to make it back home.
Okay. What causes CCD?
Our current understanding is that it's a combination of parasites, pathogens, pesticides, and poor nutrition. So we have the 4 Ps, if you will, these 4 factors that interact in still to be understood ways to create situations that, that lead to this. So as you said perfectly, stress leads into this. The bees are stressed due to these 4 factors, and they then contribute to a situation where, let's say there's a stress caused by one of them, you add one more, and you can get them over the tipping point to create a collapse.
Let's talk about a few myths, or maybe they're a reality. If you go on the internet and try to learn about CCD, you see all kinds of things. So you've confirmed parasites, diseases like viruses or pathogens. Let's talk about a few of the others. Cell phone towers. Should we be worried about cell phone towers?
There's no evidence that cell phone towers cause any damage to bees, any harm to bees, and they have not seriously been implicated in colony collapse disorder.
How about GMOs?
Also, there is no evidence that they are harmful to bees, and they are not implicated in colony collapse disorder.
How about other conspiracies that we haven't heard about because they're being kept secret?
Yeah, right. I can't comment on those, right? We also know that it's not a sign of rapture. That's
Sure.
That's on the internet,
Yeah.
and that does not appear to be the case.
Right. Let's see if that gets retweeted here tonight. Let's go to the tweet wall. If we can get that beaming on the screen. And I'm just going to, we have a lot of questions here. Meter, who is one of our scientists here, has a great question. How have killer bees, or Africanized honeybees, how have killer bee migration into the U.S. changed the makeup of bee biodiversity and pollination? First of all, what are killer bees, and should we be worried about? And by the way, if you're answering that question, what are they mad about?
Okay. So killer bees is an informal term that refers to some subspecies of the same species that we have in America that have their origin in Africa. The western honeybee has its origin, most recent origin in Europe, was brought over by settlers in the 1600s, beginning then. That's what has been here. So honeybees are not native to the Western Hemisphere. So we have the so-called western honeybee, and the subspecies came from Europe. The African subspecies were introduced directly from Africa into South America. In Africa, they have historically had a higher level of predators, more predators than in the European context. And so those bees have evolved higher levels of defense. So I want to set the record straight. Honeybees are not thugs. They're not out mugging anyone. They simply defend their hive when their hive is threatened.
What would be a typical threat?
It can be small or big. There can be ants that attack a hive. There can be vertebrates, such as skunks. In African context, honey badgers are well-known predators.
Honey badgers. I've heard those are nasty.
Yeah, indeed. Pennsylvania is a big place for bears, for example. So small and big. and the bees will mount a defense. The African bees mount a more vigorous defense. So they have a more aggressive, defensive response. So that's who they are. They have made it into North America. They are in the southern states and around the coasts. But beekeepers have by and large learned to manage them very well. Pest control people have learned to manage them very well. And they are really not serious threats in America.
Mm-hmm. Bob, any Africanized bees on the hives out here? Good, good. Here's a question from the audience. If honeybees disappear or decline, or the population drastically declines, can or will wild bees take their place?
The sociality of the honeybee is the secret of its success as a pollinator. That's what allows it to have big colonies with tens of thousands of individuals, and to go back to our earlier conversation, allows them to tell each other where to go and find those flowers. And so they amplify the message. You can get lots of bees going to the same species of plant at the same time. That's what our modern agricultural system requires.
Here's another question from the audience. How do bees navigate to and from the hives? You told us that once they get back to the hive, they communicate information about where to go, the quality of the food, and so forth. But what's the navigation system?
So they use a sun compass system. Part of it is built into their little tiny brains. When they're born, they have some of these abilities. Other abilities they have to learn. So it's a classic nature-nurture kind of situation. Prior to becoming a forager, bees will take orientation flights. They take short flights where they learn where the landmarks are, they learn the position of the sun and the direction that the sun is moving, and they build a compass-based map inside their brains. We've recorded using harmonic radar these early flights, and we can see that you can see the learning take place in front of you. The first flights that they take are tiny little flights right around the hive. Then the next flight might be they head west and they circle around there. Then their next flight might be east, and they're building this cognitive map inside their brain. Apparently, when they have enough information, they then graduate and become a forager, and they use that. One little interesting point going back to our earlier conversation is when we map that maturation process, some bees only take one orientation flight and then they become a forager. Others took 17 flights. And so is the one that took just the one flight, a genius, or taking shortcuts? And is the one that took 17 a type A personality, getting it right, or a little slow? We don't know, but we want to find out.
Yeah. Here's a quick question. Do bees sleep?
Yes. Well, we have one of the world's experts of bee sleep who's here on sabbatic at Washington University, Professor Guy Block, full disclosure, a former postdoc in my lab, and he's performed some beautiful work in his lab at Hebrew University that helps establish clearly that bees do sleep. Guy should be in the audience if he said he was coming. And is Guy here? No. Okay, well, that's okay. He's in the lab doing the work. But he has shown that bees clearly do sleep.
Here's a question from Annie Knapp. It's a good one. What do you believe is the most important thing for young minds to know about bees and their roles in our ecosystem?
So the most important thing to know is that bees are essential to our ecosystem from the point of view of general ecology, biodiversity, and from the point of view of agriculture. And we have to do everything possible to preserve them and to ensure that they thrive in the changing world that we have built.
That leads right into a question from Warren Sherman. What can we do as individuals to help bees in their current battle to thrive and survive? Are there things that we can do to promote bee biodiversity or can we plant pollinator meadows? What is it that we can do to help bees, if we can do anything?
We can. We really can. Bees, don't forget, are little creatures. They're small. The habitats that they live in are habitats that we actually can manage. We can improve. It might be interesting to note that The biodiversity of bees in Central Park is greater than in rural parts of New York State. Central Park, small park, you can walk it in a day, in less than a day.
Why is it?
There's more flowers. There's more flowers there. They have meadows, they have hedgerows, and so that's what bees need. So yes, people can create habitats with more bee-friendly flowers. There's more and more information available on that, and we're seeing this happening all over the country. There's a renaissance of beekeeping throughout the country. There's a new urban beekeeping movement that encourages then habitats to be developed in urban areas. People are paying more attention to bees than ever before, and so it's hopeful. It's hopeful. People are starting to recognize the special role that bees play in our ecosystems and the special role they play as models to understand social behavior, and are becoming more and more motivated to try to preserve them.
I got through this whole interview without making a single bee pun.
Thank you.
We're out of time, and I just want to wrap up with one thought. You're at the Donald Danforth Plant Science Center. We're not the Bee Research Center, we're the Plant Science Center. But I hope you appreciate the importance of bees in our world, in our wild landscapes, and in agriculture. Bees and plants are mutualistic partners. They've co-evolved for millions of years together. Where bees have evolved, the plants have evolved as well. In agriculture, we've simply borrowed from nature these incredibly efficient and creative pollinators to do the work for us. And it's given us the great diversity of fruits and vegetables and nuts that we enjoy. If bees are a problem, we've got a problem. Gene Robinson, thank you so much.
Yeah, pleasure.